The Brewtally Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Starving Artist Brewing. Starving Artist Brewing may be a small speck on Michigan's beer map, but they say big things come in small packages. A brewery who really puts their money where their mouth is, supporting underground artists far and wide. Making delicious beers with the simple belief that you should judge beer, not people. Brewtally Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BREWtally and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. And you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna
give up. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Brewtally Speaking podcast. I am your host, John, and this episode's guest is the legendary Pepper Keenan of Corrosion of Conformity of Down. And, I kind of hate to be a bummer first thing right out the gate, but I was a little bummed initially when getting to do this. I went from this elation of getting to have Pepper on the show finally after trying to have him on the last time COC was in town, but it just was not meant to be. And so I was really excited to get this chat done. And even when I was setting everything up and kind of setting it all up the way I always do when I did in person, so like I kind of have settings dialed in, like just a template. And even when watching it throughout the chat itself, I'm kind of moving some stuff and I'm kind of fixing on the fly. And everything looked good on my end. And then I sat down and started to listen to it. And man, like I forgot how hard it can be to do some of these in a live setting, especially at a venue when there's sound checks and stuff going on. People are loading in. And your microphones just pick up everything. And you can try to do different tricks, and I've tried them all a few different ways, but it was kind of funny. I was sort of reminded a lot of times now, I've been having conversations with people who, and I've said this on the podcast over the last couple of months leading up to this new year, that I'm not really super active on socials anymore, especially something like Facebook. Like, I just kind of casually check in at best. And it was one of those things where I started to try to manipulate this in a way to where it was as close to sounding like a normal podcast for me as possible. It was one of those things where I went through and I took Pepper's audio and I basically cleaned it up as best I could and then was going to have him be on his own track. And then I was going to go back through and re-record my side of things at home here and put that audio in. And I got about halfway through, and it's only like a 24-minute conversation. Got about halfway through, and I just was not happy with how it was. It sounded fake, and trying to like be in a laughy moment, like when Pepper makes a joke, like trying to re-punch in my laughing and then starting my line of question or whatever. And I felt like it was so inauthentic. It wasn't real. And at the end of the day, I think I would rather put out something that maybe is a little bit harsher sound quality-wise, but is authentic to the moment that it was recorded, than to go through and scrub it all of its essence and its energy. And even when I was listening back to it, that's something Pepper and I kind of even talked about. And that was actually the moment where I go, fuck that, I'm not doing this. And it was in Pepper and I talking about how, the band is still... They have monitors. They have all of their amps and cabs and everything. They are a true rock and roll band that does it the old way. You plug it in and you play, and your tone and all that is you. It's not a profile that someone created that you downloaded and now you sound like this person. And when I kind of put that same thought and mentality into what I literally was doing with this episode in this chat, I was like, man, that ain't it. It really is not it. That's so inauthentic, and it's not what I want. And yeah, it may not sound the best, but you know what? Fuck it. It was the moment we were having together. And for that, I guess I will preemptively say, I'm sorry if it's not up to the standard and quality you're used to. I've listened back to it a few times. I've tried putting different levelers on it and kind of leveling the audio levels myself, so you can at least hear me through Pepper's mic because I wasn't too far away from him. And I kind of lowered Pepper a little bit and cleaned up his audio, like I said, as much as I could, so you're not getting a little bit more of the background noise that was happening in the venue. But I also just kind of kept saying, we're in a venue. There's sound check. There's real shit happening around us. This is what you're going to get. These things aren't always perfect. And it was one of those things where it kind of, well, I mean, there's no kind of about it. It fucking frustrated me beyond belief. But, I was actually watching the new episode of Fuck That's Delicious that Action Bronson put out. And the first episode was kind of a block party thing that he had put together where, he was putting together like all these different foods and stuff like that. And he was literally there in the streets in the the quote unquote kitchen that they had provided and made, cooking for people. And everything was kind of his thing. And he had kind of assembled a bunch of people. And at one point he kind of was like, it maybe wasn't what we wanted it to be or as we had hoped it would be. And things could run smoother, and it's always a work in progress. But, people came out and they supported, and it was one of those things, like, as I've been kind of struggling with what to do with this episode and how to put it out, or even if I was going to put it out, that I kind of looked back at that even and was just like, man, even he shares and talks about something that didn't go the way he had wanted to, even though by most admissions, most would probably be like, it was a success because of X, Y, and Z. And to me, I kind of did the same thing. Like, I looked at being like, I wanted Pepper initially. I got him this time. Things didn't quite go the way I wanted to. I can still salvage this, and I think people can look past it. I hope people can look past it, but at the end of the day, it's still there. You can still hear him, and that's better than nothing. It's better than really making a bastard version of this conversation happen. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Pepper, and I'll talk to you on the other side of it. So fuck it, here we go.
Fuck it.
We are in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
We are.
Got done with your sound check. I don't know how you have any hearing left after the sound check.
Was it loud?
It's a little loud.
I'm debating. There's a place in Flint called the Machine Shop.
That's a great place.
I think this guy might be laundering money and bought another club or something because it looks very familiar.
Actually, the funny thing is, the room, as we're looking at the floor, my old landlord, before I bought the house, worked for a company, and the company hosts the people that do the interior design and so forth, the businesses. This was inspired by Twin Peaks, if you've ever seen that show.
I have not.
Okay, I haven't either, but apparently it's a big selling point to a lot of people.
Very interesting.
And so when a lot of people come here to see shows and all that kind of stuff, they are like, oh, I've seen that. That looks very familiar.
Nice.
And it's one of those things.
Well, who gives a shit?
These are the things that when you design a building that you probably don't.
I'm very big on
details.
Design, yes.
Is that actually something you are like doing in your own personal time?
I've probably made more money flipping vernacular houses than I have playing music. Yeah. Yep.
How did you get into?
Keep them period correct. Growing up in New Orleans, made a record. Other ding-dongs bought Camaros and shit. I bought a house and flipped it and been doing it ever since.
I feel like there's something to be said about someone who takes the time to think long-term versus like in the now, like the immediate.
That's a fact, yeah. I didn't think I'd be here at 55. That's a fact.
Is that something, is kind of, I guess not maybe thinking long-term, but is kind of thinking more long game maybe, of things that maybe your peers aren't doing?
Once COC shifted gears a little bit, and we started thinking, about how we dedicated our lives as dumb punk kids of playing music and shit, and then getting better at it, and digging on Skinner and whatever, ZZ Top and all that stuff, you start thinking a little more long term, which we did. But that being the fact, you kind of morph, and not to change the subject, but you put your dick on the chopping block and start extending yourself musically in a punk rock scene where that wasn't allowed. You were an asshole. You fucking diss the scene or whatever. But moving forward and thinking long term was something that we kind of thought about when we were younger.
It's funny. I feel like
there's a lot of bands that I know that have painted themselves in a corner.
Yeah.
And they just have to do the same song and dance over and over and over.
Well, I feel like that's been something, and I said this to Mike a couple years ago when you guys were here initially for the BLS tour, but then you guys did that random one-off show at Intersection due to Zach's illness.
Right. I remember that.
And, I said to him at the time, I feel like your band and a lot of bands that have made it from your era had to figure out a way to be unique and true to themselves because they wouldn't have made it past like the commercial success of whatever the song was.
It wasn't trying to be commercial, it was just being bored. I mean, I remember a long time ago doing an interview in Germany and this fucking guy goes, "Pepper, why have you abandoned your hardcore roots?" And I was like, "I got 2 words for you, homie. Cro-Mags." They got it.
Yeah.
We're off. We're out. And I believe me, that's a huge part of our lives. But evolution's a thing too.
I think it's funny getting to befriend a lot of people that tour. There's a segment I wish I could have on the show where it's honest Germans, like your favorite honest German thing that they've
never met one.
Yeah, but it's. I feel like it's one of those things where a lot of people, when you hear it, you're kind of taken aback because it's not how people are. They're not. Usually, people aren't that blunt with you, and I kind of love it because it does remind me as an original East Coaster living in the Midwest. That's sort of how we are.
Well, I mean, and granted, I'm not speaking in German.
No.
So their English is a little harsher than you would. You're accustomed to.
Yes.
Unless you've done a million interviews with Germans, you'd be off. You'd be like, "What the?"
Yeah. But there's a sense of it that I do love, and I love going in through and watching, press from there because I feel like it's totally unique unto itself, and I feel like it is kind of refreshing in its bluntness.
Yeah. I mean, we could go off on a tangent on that shit. They're very streamlined in their musical taste, and if they put it into certain boxes.
So recently I had the Godfather Kirk from Crowbar on.
As I call him, Crocus.
I think everyone, when you hear his voice, of course.
I made that up, by the way.
And it was one of those things where I said I'd be remiss, just given my age being almost 40 at this point, and down to celebrating 20 years this year.
Is that right?
I mean, we're at the tail end of it, but
20 years.
2002, when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm. I remember it well.
What is a fun story that you remember from making that record? Because I feel like it's so, like, that record was so unique.
Down to, I think we did that record in 28 days.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's the one, yeah. Well, we convinced the record label that we were going to rent gear from Nashville and have it shipped down, and it was a lot of expensive gear. Studer tape machine, Neve console, and they thought they were going to some fancy place, but it was a barn in Phil's property. And we had to sign so many pieces of paper to let that truck drive off the property. And the boy's like, "I'll be back in 28 days." I was like, "All right." And we didn't have one song written. We had 28 days to write it, track it, mix it, and they picked the gear up. So it was very good. That was a good learning experience as being in a band with all your buddies and having to put your dick on the chopping block. We didn't have a damn riff. Mm. We plugged everything in. Took 3 days to make it work. We're like, all right, let's go.
Now we got 25.
Yeah, right.
Is it, it's interesting because I feel like, I grew up, my dad playing a lot of, like, Thin Lizzy and stuff like that. A lot of, like, bands that I don't think are super popular, but are bands that, like, just those records, like, when you listen to them, feel lived in. They feel like there was, like, those songs had to come out of those unique players in those situations.
Well, of course.
And I feel like Down, and a lot of what you've done in CFC even, I feel like even the newer stuff you have put out, I feel like still holds on to that tired and true. It's guys in a room, we fucking wrote something, and it's who we are.
And it does come down, I'm not preaching to the converted, but words matter. And in order to write these words and not be fictitious, you have to have had your nose broken and beat up and whatever. shit you got into to mean what you're singing.
Yeah.
You know, and Thin Lizzy was a prime example of that. Phil Lynott was a genius, a troubled genius. Yeah.
I think one of the favorite stories I ever heard of Thin Lizzy, and it was a couple years ago, I came across this anecdote, was that he wanted to hook up with some other dude's girl, slipped the dude a bunch of heroin or something, so when the dude finally fucked off, he took his chick and banged her. And I was like, wow.
I don't know that story. I know a lot of Thin Lizzy stories, but not that one. I've been to his mother's house.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Philomena. Helped her paint it. Me and Kirk went over there, hung out at her house. She pulled out the bass with the gold pick guard.
Wow.
Let us take pictures with it and shit. She goes, "Stay off the drugs, lads."
I mean,
but she meant it. She's a wonderful person, but yeah.
Kirk and I were actually kind of talking about that, with him having a daughter that's college age now. On their new record, they were talking about a lot of the drug pandemic that's kind of sweeping the U.S. and the world, I guess, as a large. It's kind of interesting because I'm not the same age as you guys, but I feel like I definitely still grew up in the time and age where it's like, hey, you can experiment, you can do whatever, have a healthy respect for the drugs and all that kind of stuff.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
No
and
way.
It's crazy to feel like sometimes when you guys, I think, talk about the things that you've gone through and lived through, as you were just saying, I feel like some people look at it as a badge of honor, and I think it's kind of lost on the generation now where it's like, I'm not bragging, I'm telling you as almost like a story to be like, don't fuck up like I could have. Like, I'm on the other side of it and I live.
That sounds fictitious at this point with where these kids are at, Yeah. They don't have, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't experiment. You can't buy weed from some crazy dude down the street and fucking, that you don't know. It's not going to happen. Yeah, I'm worried about the kids these days.
Does it feel so far removed when you look back at your career, like how much has changed, not just in the musical landscape, but just the world?
I mean, it's kind of irrelevant because I grew up in New Orleans and it was just absolute insanity. Hit the streets when you try and grow a mustache when you're 13 years old and get on your bike and sneak into a bar and all that crap. But them days are gone, dude.
It's weird because I feel like going to New Orleans for my first time somewhat recently, I feel like I had a little bit of seeing that because there was a bar my wife and I went to, Ernst's.
Ernst Cafe.
Yes.
Yep.
And I remember that was the first place we stopped in, and I remember just kind of very much like the start of our conversation, I remember looking at the floor, and I was like, oh, what the fuck?
You're right.
And then I happened to be sitting next to the plaque that explains
right.
what is on the floor, and for those listening.
Prior to World War II.
Prior to World War II, because it's one of the, I think if I remember correctly, the plaque said it's one of the oldest bars still around in that area by
right.
And basically they have what appears to be swastikas on the floor. They're facing the other way.
Right.
And it talks about the history of, how that was all pre-World War II. But it's interesting when you go to places like this, or places like that, I should say, just the history that doesn't really exist anymore. I grew up in Delaware, and we still hold on to one of the original 13 colonies. Here's all these old buildings.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really tear them down and build up new. And I feel like that was the one thing that I enjoyed about New Orleans, was that it feels pretty. There are still pockets that you can go to, and it feels like what New Orleans always has been.
Well, yeah, but not just the architecture and all that stuff, but the lifestyle and the music, and I would say that I can guarantee you, Phil Anselmo would not be Phil Anselmo if he was from Berlin.
Yes.
Neither would Kirk. Neither would I. We had the luxury of growing up in a crazy town. I used to play in a band in the Neville Brothers practice next door to us back in the day, and they would give us so much shit. What the fuck are y'all? And it was a kind of a learning curve. Things had to be slippery and not mechanical. It was a big thing growing up in that environment in a town like New Orleans. So I am thankful for that. It wasn't the best situation all the time, but it was a wonderful place to grow up in. And in terms of playing music,
I feel like that's the one thing too that separates a lot of, I'll say, your era of musicians, is I feel like a lot of people didn't leave where they came from. I feel like a lot of times now people, as soon as they get money, it's like, well, fucking, I'm out of here, I'm going to LA, I'm going to wherever. And I feel like...
But and on top of that, not dissing anybody, but you can go to a guitar center, buy a Dimebag Darrell guitar, buy an amp, get the right pedal, have this crushing tone. But back in the day, we were stabbing our speakers to make them break up, shit like that. We were creating something that was in your brain, but it didn't exist.
Right.
And that's a big thing. And there's plenty of musicians out there now that are making things evolve, and that's the ones I latch on to.
It's interesting watching you sound check now. The fact that you guys even have monitors, wedge monitors on the stage is interesting because it's
hey man,
in-ears.
Electricity is real.
Yeah.
There ain't no fucking doubt about it. Me and Woody talk about it all the time. You can take these Kempers and all that shit. I get it, but it ain't me and Woody's thing. Electricity and wattage and volume mean things in the business that we're in.
Yes.
It has to go.
Well, and it's the thing where I feel like, your tech was kind of getting your guitar ready for you to come out and sound check. But as soon as you jammed with the rest of the band, I was like, oh fuck, there's the sound, there's your tone, there's your sound, and there's the sound of the band. And I get it with flying dates and stuff like that. You want the portability of being able to know that you're going to sound good with the Kempers and all that stuff. But there's still something to be said about plugging into an amp and dialing in your own.
Yeah, vacuum tubes glowing and electricity really moving the speakers of all the things you learned as a kid. I'm not against any of it, but it ain't my trick. That's for sure. I think the more you do stuff, and you start thinking about electricity and volume and the room and how things are going to feed back and how you got to get out of the way and move to make it not, do its thing. It's tricky, Alchemist.
Well, I think what's interesting about it, and I know when I see you guys play again tonight, I'll probably think the same thing. Where it sounds so stupid to say it like this, but it's rock and roll in its purest form. When the last time I saw you play the other room, again, cabs and amps and all that usually aren't on stage, so there's not even the sound coming from the things.
Who does that? I don't know anybody in my world, but I'm sure there are bands that do.
Yeah, a lot of bands do it now, so they can basically have a stage other than the drummer that's just open, so they can move around. When you
God,
bigger stuff.
What a drag.
I feel like, but it's also weird because I've said this plenty of times. I think Grand Rapids, I'll say at least from my perspective, is a musician's town. When you go see bands, you see a lot of what Josta likes to call the Impress Me Bros, where it's the arms crossed and stuff like that. But it's not because they don't like you. It's because a lot of them are like, all right, what are you running? What are your settings at? What do you got?
God.
And it's
what a waste
so
of time.
Great bands that I don't get to see the same energy when I see them play anywhere else. And I'm like, oh my god, that band looks amazing. And then it's here it's just people standing there going what do you got? What are you playing? And I get it, but I'm also I feel like I'm missing sometimes the true experience.
The roots of what these guys are trying to achieve and where it came from.
I hope I don't.
Bad Brains.
I don't have you have that in your head later if that is what happens here.
No.
Someone said this earlier.
Bad Brains, Discharge, Void, all the things that we grew up on, me and Woody and Mike and everybody. That shit was uncharted territory. Yeah. That's the beauty of it, And I would hope that any band that's trying to kick somebody's ass nowadays is not trying to be perfection all the time. Fucking up is 3/4 of the fucking deal.
I think that's one of my greatest random bits of information I learned was Dude Looks Like a Lady, that sample that starts the song is only in the song because they couldn't figure out how to turn it off. And so that's why it's there. But
absolutely.
It's iconic at this point in the song. And just things like that. I don't think people, I've said too often, recently as I get older, I think people are too afraid to make mistakes. People want to be perfect, want to know everything.
That's the stupidest thing you could ever do.
I have learned to be more comfortable in going, I don't know something, teach me. Or show me something that I don't know, instead of being I know everything.
But you don't know everything.
No.
You never will.
No.
Nobody ever will.
No. But in the day and age now with the internet and phones and all that stuff, I feel like everyone has a wealth of information in their fingertips.
Yeah, well, guess what? They better choose wisely.
Kind of because I know another sound check's about to come. So going. I was kind of thinking today, thinking about Down 2, thinking about a lot of, the records you put out, the time frame of getting to learn about you guys through watching MTV and stuff like that as a youth. And I feel like it's interesting because a band that I got into that really kind of blew open the doors for a lot of more bands and musicians was Pantera. and we're very close to, like, we just got a snippet sort of tease the other day online of the band coming back of this new iteration. When you see stuff like this, obviously knowing Phil and all the players involved, like, is it something that gets you excited to at least hear the music again and see it live on?
Extremely, yeah. I mean, I know the Pantera crew, I know everybody like the back of my hand, you know, and Phil sings them down. On a selfish note, yeah, is it going to put down on the back burner for a year or two? Sure. Do they need to get this off their chest and get it out there? Yes. The kids need to hear this? Yes. They're rehearsing in New Orleans. It's insane. They got Grady, Daryl's tech is with them. Sonny, the lighting guy, is with them. It's going to be a very cathartic thing. And it's going to, this is our last show. I fly to Los Angeles and then I fly to Mexico City. We're playing the next night at this festival. Opening for Judas Priest. Pantera is the first night in Mexico City. Headlining. You know, Mexico City. You're talking probably 80,000 people. And it's going to be insane. And they've been working really hard at it. You know, and those guys all deserve it. And I don't care what anybody says. I could give a rat's ass. But I know internally, and they need to close the book, you know, and they're gonna do it, and it's gonna be great, and people need to hear that shit, dude. I think, you know, they got a good lineup and the way it's gonna work, and they're all working their butts off. That's a fact.
You know, a lot has been said in recent years about how there needs to be like the next upcoming bands. You know, the Judas Priest and so forth can only endure for so much longer. Who are some bands that you've toured with maybe that you're excited to? Because I feel like you guys do a really good job of kind of extending the branch out and bringing like new bands out with you. In addition to legacy acts and so forth, what are some bands that you're excited about, or have you excited about the scene and where it's going?
Down.
That new band that we've never heard of?
No, but it's a deal. I mean, these big festivals are going on, and I'm sure Iron Maiden's going to pull out soon. You know, AC/DC's not going to be there much longer if they're not gone already. Yeah. And they got to pack these fucking giant festivals. There ain't many. Mastodon maybe is on Contender. I don't know.
I don't know either.
You know,
I don't really know that, because I feel like the international scene is really weird, where some bands are huge there, not here, or vice versa.
Right.
And I don't know. And I think it's interesting. I feel like a band like Down, I feel like, especially in light of this Pantera stuff, I feel like Down is really poised to come back and kind of...
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's got potential to step up to the next level, you know. But, yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation in the heavy metal world. There ain't no AC/DCs and Iron Maidens out there after that, you know. Name one. Avenged Sevenfold.
I'm going to pose this question to you.
Five Finger Death Punch.
A bit of a hot button take, maybe, but the reality of it, I think, is interesting. You know, you see a lot in pop and like hip hop, a lot of people willing to collaborate and bring each other up, whereas I feel like the rock and metal world is kind of pitted against itself. Do you feel like that's because somebody, I don't know, want to say a label or a record people or whatever, pit you all against each other?
Oh, no. I don't.
Or it's just egos, maybe?
It's total egos, dude. We're going to kick your ass kind of mentality. But, you know, and that was part of the deal back in the day. You know, it was, you were putting your dick on the chopping block and trying to kick everybody's ass, you know, and it was ego oriented, and you rehearsed, you practiced longer, and you had a heavier thing, and, you know, but those, you know, I'm happy being in a place like this. Would I love to be a headliner at a festival? Sure. You know, do we have the songs that could do it? I think so. But it's just, there's so much involved, and when these big bands start disappearing, I'm glad I'm not a fucking festival promoter. I'm glad I'm not going to be one in 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's the tough part, is when you see things like this, it's like, all right, who are your next ones? And honestly, like I said, I think that's something I've always kind of...
You can go back, you could bank on a festival if Motorhead was headlining in Germany.
Yeah.
Money in the bank. Motorhead delivered every fucking time. Who's next in line for that? I've thought about it many days. I don't know. But
I guess this will be my last question for you, because I know we got a sound check. When you hear something, when you think of things like that, does it kind of bum you out that the scene hasn't done enough on its own to promote from within?
Well, all my buddies, God knows we've tried. we've given everything, you know, between Kirk and Woody and Phil and, you know, Jimmy Bauer. Yeah, we've put our heart and soul into it, you know. But
it's at the end of the day, that's all you can do, and then the rest is.
That's the only reason you did it in the first place, you know.
I think that's the other part is a lot of people don't do it anymore for the pure reasons. I think they do it for, you know, selfish reasons. I
mean, all of us, I speak for all my buddies. We did it because we had no choice. We're in, you know. We're lifers. We're not weekenders, you know.
Fun question I've been asking at the end, because we're at the end of the year, the industry is winding down. What have you enjoyed the most about this year, and what are you looking forward to the most?
What's the question again?
So we're at the end of the year,
right?
And the industry shuts down basically now. So what have you enjoyed the most? Like, what is like a memory you remember the most that you're proud of from this past year, and what are you looking forward to in 2023?
Shit. I'm not gonna get personal, but yeah, that's a tough question to answer. Okay. I'm thankful to be here. I'll put it that way. And we'll be thankful next year.
There you go. Especially after Thanksgiving. Thank you very much, Pepper, for the time.
You're welcome.
So that was my chat with Pepper from COC and Down. Want to thank him for taking the time to chat with me. I would say apologies again for the audio, but I mean, it is what it is. I explained that in the intro. If you don't like it, you don't like it. If you listen to it, awesome. Thank you. I promise I'll try to do better. All of that said, you know, I had an interesting thought when listening back to this, the several different iterations and time I spent with this more than I have just about any other chat. So I feel like I've kind of really relived this moment several times over the last couple of days of trying to fix the audio. But it was this thing like, you know, I had talked about in the Butcher Babies episode in the intro outro about kind of the refinding of my fandom of music and then the passion for listening to music and doing things. And it, you know, it really started with the new him record, or I should say the new Villa Vallo record that's coming out, the solo record. And it's been really interesting. You know, I got that record, I listened to it a bunch, and I continue to listen to it. It'll be out shortly for the rest of you all to hear. But it is one of those things where, you know, thinking about being a fan of things, thinking about where things started, and to sit across from Pepper was one of those things. I remember as it was kind of happening, I was kind of nervous because, like, I don't think at times people can understand the power of TV. And I remember as a youth sitting in front of my parents' TV in the living room, and I remember watching MTV because it was just on like all day. And I remember seeing videos for Pantera, seeing videos for Crowbar, like, you know, Headbangers Ball and stuff like that, seeing, you know, Clean My Wounds, and like really falling in love with that song and falling in love with the bands. And I remember, I think my dad did get Ann Albatross on CD. And I remember just kind of, you know, being into this band and being into this music and kind of finding a new way to like even talk with my dad over the bonding of love of rock and riffs and stuff like that. And, you know, talking about how, yeah, you know, this sort of reminds me of a heavier Thin Lizzy. Well, yeah, it does. And, you know, talking about the impact of Thin Lizzy to us and on us as two individuals. And sitting across from Pepper, it was just kind of crazy because it's like, you know, as I said, really, I think the big one for me was Down. You know, that Down 2 record was kind of my first quote-unquote supergroup. And it was kind of quickly overshadowed also eventually by A Perfect Circle, and mainly that was just Maynard being the big name and a secondary band. But, you know, for me, Down was really that first big supergroup for me. And everyone at that time just seemed unfucking touchable. They were fucking gods. Like, you have Kirk from Crowbar, just this tone, and Pepper with his voice and his tone. Like, they each had their own unique playing style. And then Phil being from Pantera, seeing all those dudes in the Pantera home videos, you know, even Kirk with the Hulk's blood, and stuff like that. It's just, you know, it's so crazy. Jimmy Bauer, like, all these fucking legends. And when you see these people on, you know, your Headbangers Balls and your stuff like that, and reading about them in Kerrang or, you know, Revolver magazine or all these magazines that I used to read as a kid growing up, they don't seem like people you're ever going to meet in person and talk to. So I had this kind of epiphany moment, because Pepper is the first person I've talked to since the pandemic. He's the first in-person one I've done. And it just was this thing where to sit across from him really kind of reminded me of being like, fuck, man, like, I used to watch you on TV as a kid. I used to listen to a lot, like, your CDs with my dad. Like, I used to, like, just this level of anticipation of, like, who I thought he was based on all of these things and these other experiences that he's lived decades beyond. And now I'm sitting down across from him. And the weird thing to me is, and I know this is probably a really weird comment to make, but I couldn't help but think that he looks like a man's man. Like, and I don't mean that like in a derogatory way. Like, he just looks like a tough son of a bitch. Like a dude who has lived and seen some shit and can tell you about it, but also like could just flip that script and probably be a real mean motherfucker too. And I don't know. I don't feel like that era of person exists anymore. So I feel like when I get to do these podcasts with some of these icons, these legends, at least to me, it takes me back to feeling that way about them. And I know that they say you shouldn't put people on a pedestal, and celebrities and so forth are people too, and they absolutely are. But it is still kind of weird to remember a time and era where only quote unquote famous people got on TV. You didn't have people like myself being able to get on TV for doing fuck all and nothing. You had to be really fucking good to be in any of these forms of mediums of entertainment or media. And yeah, it was really fun getting to sit across from Pepper and talk to him. And man, he's the real fucking deal. That's all I can say. He's the real deal. He is someone that I'd long been wanting to get on the show, and it's moments like this episode that still keep me excited about doing the show. Even when I feel like I'm getting fatigued and burned out, I still have these moments where I'm like, man, 3 years ago I was trying my ass off to get him and I just couldn't, but like I got him now. Like, I know Dewey and I talk about this from Pure Pleasure, talk about this where it's almost like guest hunting or guest collecting. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing either as I think about it more, because it is a thing where, like, why wouldn't you want to have these connections with people that you have so firmly ingrained in memories of your youth and growing up? I mean, I think that's really fucking cool. All of that said, this was a fun, quick chat. I haven't done like a little 20-25 minute chat in a little while. I wanted to be very mindful of the load in and sound checking going on that day. But if you would like to keep up with COC, it's real simple. You can find them on Facebook at Corrosion of Conformity, Instagram and Twitter at COC Cabal, CABAL, COC CABAL. If you can't see that, spell it, whatever. It's all in the show notes. If you'd like to keep up with Pepper, you can find him on Twitter at the Pepper Keenan and Instagram at WiseBloodPJK. Also got to say, it was really fucking cool once again to see the PGK guitar coming out. There's some instruments, man. There's some instruments. You see them and you're just like, holy shit, that's that guitar. That's that, that's that bass. Michael Anthony with the Jack Daniels bass. Like, there are just some things that are so iconic, and Pepper's guitars, to me, are very iconic. For him, for his sound, I think it's very early ingrained in me why I wanted to play ESP guitars. Between him, the Metallica dudes, and just so many countless other great players playing ESPs. So it's just it's all connected to your childhood memories for me with this episode. Just so much growing up is around Pepper and COC and bands of that ilk. So it's really fucking cool to be able to have him on the show. Speaking of the show, if you'd like to keep up with us, Brew Speak Pod on all your socials, real simple to find. If you'd like to keep up with me, it's usually just at jbeatty616. Not much of a follow. Twitter is probably where I'm most active. If you like keeping up with sports and stuff like that, I tweet about those things quite a bit. Or you could just email me, brutallyspeaking@gmail.com. I reply to most of my emails pretty quickly. And for the Brutally Speaking podcast, I am John, and I'll be back next week. Hope you enjoy yours, and we'll talk then.